Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Here's the story. This happened around 6 months ago. I have a regular side job of feeding cows for my grandfather on his 3 properties, with all 3 being lumped together adding up to maybe 300 acres. The service truck I drive is a diesel pickup and doesn't drive very fast, and starting work at 5 o'clock in winter equals nighttime work, which by the way sucks balls. I filled up the 6 buckets that I needed for the 2 farms I feed after the first. The second farm is only accessible from a very small and rural back road. I pull up to the gate that goes inwards towards the forest. It opens into a field with trees on the left, right, and center that opens into a large field. Put my hand down looking for my keys. Can't find them. Frustrated and tired, I get out and go back and around the truck and open the tailgate. I grab 2 buckets and grunt and say, "Shit," while putting them on the ground, and walk to the gate and start lifting the buckets over the gate. Grunt, "Shit," comes from the woods behind me on the next property over, also my property but never used. Property is nothing but dense forest that moves uphill and goes up onto a large hill. Kind worried, I listen closer. Grunt, "Shit," this time sounding more like me. Very confused at this point, wondering what the hell is making that noise and why it sounds like me. Not loud enough to be heard over footsteps, so I ignore it. Over the next 4 weeks I kept hearing similar sounds and phrases coming from that area. Always carrying a .45 and an FAL in my backseat with a full magazine, so I felt pretty safe, but cautious. The sound keeps getting closer and closer every day of every week, but not fast enough that it's super noticeable. One night I pull up to the gate, this time with keys, and the cows who are used to my sounds and presence start to flood through the trees in a line. I step out of the truck and start pouring the feed into the concrete feeding troughs. I look up and the cows are staring at something. One cow bellows near where they are looking. After maybe a minute of all of them and I staring at whatever is beyond the tree line, a sound that sounds exactly like the bellow the cow made. Same tone, inflection, everything. Big difference though, much, much louder than the cows and deeper. Cows turn and bolt away from the sound, and I'm sitting there confused as F. At this point I have my hand on my .45 and I'm very confused and scared. Whatever that is, it's nothing I've ever heard or experienced, and I can't imagine any animal that can do that. I slowly make my way around the back of the truck and onto the other side away from where the sound came from. Watching the tree line from where that sound came from. Slowly something comes into the light of the headlights, and I am honestly shaking right now as I type this. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. It looked human but, just wrong. Its legs were about the same length as its arms, and it walked on all 4s. On all 4s it stood maybe at 5 foot. It didn't notice me standing there watching it, and it started to sniff the ground like a dog. It moved about sniffing the ground, and it raised its head in the air and looked over towards the truck. My God, its eyes. They were bright yellow and very sunken into its head, and its mouth protrude inwards like a hole with skin wrapped on the inside. It flared out its jaws like when you move your jaw to have an underbite. It did this while sniffing the air? The best way I can describe it. The ground was really slippery at the time from a week of rain, and I tried to back up and grab my FAL and slipped. The sound of me falling made the thing turn towards me. It couldn't see me, but it was trying, straining its veiny and long neck towards me. I swear to God. It stood up. It fucking stood. This fucking thing stood up on its hind legs, and it was 5 foot on all 4. Standing, it was probably 9 feet tall. I'm 6'1" and much taller than most people in my town that I know. This thing towers over me. Me and an athletic 230-pound man sat in the mud petrified by this creature standing maybe 30 yards at 9 feet tall. Was definitely a situation that I never imagined myself being in ever in my lifetime. I vault upwards with my legs and swing the door open and grab my FAL and turn towards the thing. As I'm turning my sights to lay on it, I get a sight picture, and this thing is galloping towards me. I popped 5 shots off at the creature, and hunters know that sound that's made when you land on target. The thump of the round penetrating the target. I landed 3 shots, 2 in the chest and 1 in the neck. The creature made a gurgling sound similar to the cow bellow it made a few minutes earlier. It slid and fell on its side and writhed around on the ground in a circle. It got back up and stared at me. Those eyes were penetrating, and I laid 2 more rounds near its chest and head. That scared it enough to turn and run back into the woods and to the field. I don't know why, but I had the strong urge to pursue it, and I jumped in the truck and followed it. I went down through the creek bed to go to the field, and when I broke through and beamed my light to where the creature ran, the first could see its trail leading away from the field. It took maybe a minute or 2 minutes to get through the creek bed, and by that time the creature had made it halfway across a 2.5 football-sized field. I'm still shaken by this, and the next day I came out early to search for blood, and the blood was dark black. I wish I had taken pictures to show you, but I'm new and only got into 4chan from YouTube Greentext stories. But yeah, that was my story.
Holy cow, don't go back there. It's sure to stalk you out of spite and revenge if a shot to the head didn't kill it. What was the build of the creature?
I've been back pretty much every day since and haven't seen anything. A few dead cows here and there that were dragged off by that thing probably, but I made a sketch of it a few days when I had the nerve to do it. See the pic. Any idea of what it could be? I'm thinking it could be a thing called a Skinwalker, or a Wendigo, as one of native buddies put it.
It's probably either, or from the looks of it. I'm not an expert since I live in a different country with different things. Closest comparison I would make would be a stalking spirit. A spirit created by a sorcerer to stalk, but goes rogue and prowls an area it fancies. But those tend to be more animal-like than humanoid, taking on a mangled animal form, and they also come to being due to different circumstances. So I would guess that this is a Wendigo.
I told my native friend the story as a kind of funny story and changed the creature to a rabid deer so that he didn't judge me. But I mentioned the humanoid part by accident, and he looked at me with the widest eyes ever and said, "Wendigo," and told me about the legend and that they have been seen for centuries.
1996, hunting out of state in South Dakota with my cousins. We get a good tip on a spot and drive out to check this place out. We park the truck about noon, check our watches, and decide to split up and meet back at 5 p.m. I get my bearings and hike in for about 20 minutes, marking my way in, find a nice clearing and decide to set up. As I sit patiently quietly, the forest comes alive with the sounds of nature. Small animals scurrying about, birds moving from tree to tree. Then something seemed very off. The forest, which was bathed in sunlight, now looked sepia-toned, like an old photograph. The sounds of the forest were gone. It was dead silent. There was no movement anywhere. I never felt more unease in my life. I felt like I shouldn't be there and needed to leave. I could feel my heart pounding in my head. I looked down at my watch and saw only 2 hours had gone by. Fuck this, I'm going back. I start making my way back and notice the forest came back to life, the sky getting darker. Really darker. I emerged from the edge and see all my cousins in the truck. "Where were you, man?" We were honking the horn, firing off a couple shots. I didn't hear anything, and I wasn't gone that long. It was 5:40 p.m. My watch said 3:10 p.m. I thought maybe my watch went bad. I reset it. It never lost time for as long as I had it since.
At an abandoned weapons foundry turned federal park close by my town. All woods and overgrown buildings with some trails for tourists. Me and some friends just walking around. One of my friends gets ahead of us and around a bit of a turn. Look away for a second, and when I look back I see this old woman walking behind my friend that went ahead, matching his pace, less than a foot behind him. He doesn't seem to notice her and walks normally. Other friend with me didn't think much of it, but thought it was weird. I get kinda spooked, because her clothes looked off for some reason too. Not stuff someone would wear hiking and certainly not fashionable, made out of a kinda brown burlap material. I call out my friend's name and start to kinda speed walk up to him. Old woman turns around slightly to look at me, then just calmly walks off the trail into the woods. No other trail the way she was walking, just a hill and then dense brush. Friend's not as spooked as me, and we just continue our hike. Their hill she walked over was pretty steep too, but she did it at normal speed, not that of an old lady. Felt weird about the whole thing and remember it even 6 to 7 years later, might have just been some old woman off her meds, but it made me feel pretty uneasy. I went out of my back door one night, lighting the charcoal grill. There is no backyard to speak of, it pretty much immediately goes to a steep hill, covered with trees. It is pitch black up there, can't see anything. I hear something moving, not unusual, lots of deer around, but whatever it is, it's breaking branches that sound like they are at least 2 inches in diameter, which is immediately alarming to me because I am imagining something of fairly large mass. This is in Central Texas, there are no bears or anything like that. So after a few seconds of listening to this and being in frozen, WTF mode, I then hear what sounds like huge wings flapping. Again, I can see anything, but I'm estimating 15-foot wingspan or more. At that point I noped and ran back inside, dead-bolted the door and got a shotgun. I know it's mostly speculation because I didn't see whatever it was, but I know what I heard, and I know I felt fear. Coincidentally, not more than a week later, I happened to be listening to Coast AM, and there was a guest talking about reports of giant birds in Texas.
Saw your other post and almost replied, but the thread was deep and I figured everyone would just accuse me of ripping off your story anyway. There's so many similarities, but there are plenty of differences. Plus I never saw anything, only heard sounds. Anyway, I grew up on a farm too. We had sheep, cows, horses, and lots of other stuff too. We bred the sheep on a schedule, so they start having lambs around January and most are done by early May. That means the early ones are born when it's still cold out though, so we have to go out a couple times every night to check them and see if any new ones were born. I was in high school and stayed up all the time anyway, so I usually went the first shift, which would be some time between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. just depending on when I went. That night I had been playing Silent Hill. It had just come out, so it was still new and definitely creeped me out. So after like 6 hours of playing that, I go out to our pastures at about 2 a.m. or so to look for new lambs. The weather was foggy and cold and misty just like Silent Hill, which probably didn't help me be clear-headed, but I definitely didn't dream this up or anything. Anyway, I got there and spent some time walking the pasture with my flashlight. Everything seemed fine and there were no new lambs anywhere. Then I hear a scream in the woods of a connected pasture separated by a fence. It wasn't a human scream. It wasn't even an animal I knew of. I had lived on that farm literally my entire life and had never heard that noise. I was a little freaked out but trying to think rationally. We kept some cows in that pasture and cows will occasionally get stuck in mud or something. If they are separated, they will bellow for the others. I guess you know this since you have cows too, but I figured I should explain my thinking for everyone else. Anyway, I started trying to think of an explanation for that sound and was wondering if maybe it was a stuck cow who had bellowed themselves hoarse or something. The sound was like a dry, raspy scream. It honestly just sounded like some undead witch screaming, but I was trying to think of something more realistic that might be making it. I figured if it was a cow, then I was obligated to go get it some help. So, I headed towards it with my light. I got to the creek and saw nothing. The noise, however, kept coming. Maybe every 4 or 5 minutes I would hear it. As I had gotten closer to the creek, I could tell it was right there in that area, but I wasn't able to see anything. Once I actually got to the bottom of the ravine, though, I realized the sound was moving. It was going further from me. At this point, I'm positive it's not a cow stuck since it's moving, but I'm just really curious what unidentified animal I've never encountered on the farm I grew up on could make those hellish screams. So I head deeper in the woods with my light. The thing keeps screaming. Every 4 or 5 minutes, like clockwork, it screams, and almost every time it's moved away from me. Now I'm thinking it's definitely just some animal I don't know that's afraid of me and my light bumbling around in the woods, but I'm determined to see it at least once. I started trying to cut my light off so I don't scare it. The moon was bright enough I could still see enough to walk around clumsily. It seemed like that was working too. I was able to get closer and closer to it. It kept moving though and kept screaming, but I was getting closer. I thought I was right at it at one point, so I had my light off and somehow ended up right in the middle of some short pines. They were so thick I couldn't see shit and couldn't feel my way through them. It was thick enough I would have had to cut them or at least run through them hard enough to break a bunch of limbs at once. I turned my light back on and started looking, and I swear I was 100% surrounded on all sides by these fucking trees. It was like I stumbled through some hole that immediately grew back in behind me. I just remember turning in a circle multiple times with my flashlight thinking, how the fuck is this possible? How can I get in these trees in the dark and see no way out with a light? At this point, I can still hear the thing screaming. It moved maybe 20 meters away and stopped. Just sitting in one spot, still screaming every few minutes but not really doing anything. I kind of stopped worrying about it and was trying to find my way out of the fucking pine tree labyrinth I fell into somehow. I don't know how long I followed the thing, or how long I was using my light to try and find a hole to push through the trees, but while I was stuck in the trees my light died. I was still calm for a bit, just thinking, well, I got in with no light, I'll get out without one, and I kept trying to find spots between trees I could push through and get out from under them. But then the fucking screamer started moving again and every time seemed closer to me. I'm starting to get really freaked out and thinking I made a big mistake trying to search for this thing. I'm breaking through limbs and shit as fast as I can, so I'm definitely making a lot of noise, but every scream is closer than the last one. It was definitely not scared off by me being loud. Eventually this thing is in the fucking trees with me. Like maybe a few feet from me, just still screaming every few minutes. I still never saw anything. I didn't want to. I just wanted out of the woods, or at least out of these tightly growing pines where I could move and see with the moonlight. But whatever that fucking thing was, it was right beside me screaming at me. Every time I broke through a spot or moved a bit, it stayed with me, but all it ever did was follow and scream. Eventually I busted through enough of the trees I could see and move easier, and I just fucking ran in a straight line for the closest open field where I could see easier. That thing was still fucking screaming like it was on a schedule, but it didn't follow me out of the woods. It just stayed there in those thick pines screaming. I actually did hear it one more time a few nights later, but I left it be that time. I was down at our main barn and it was where I had been the other night. So it would have been half a mile or so from me, but still easy to hear it. Then, after that second one, I never heard it again. I never once saw what it was or figured out any explanation that made sense to me.
I came across a group of indigenous people living out in the wild in Louisiana, like 30 miles south of New Orleans. I walked onto their campgrounds. They had huge huts built out of sticks, leaves and mud. I had seen smoke coming from that direction, and I found them sitting around a fire pit. They drew their bows on me and shouted "Wag it" at me until I left. They were covered in animal tattoos, and very tan and small. There's a lot of land out there we haven't paved over yet, and in the woods there are many secrets known only to those who find them.
Sharing 2 experiences I've had that I still can't explain to this day. Be me. On a 6th grade school camping trip in the San Bernardino Mountains. Nice area with multiple lodges and cabins. Filled with staff members who I presume are there year-long. On the first day we hiked several trails to tour the area. Tour ends, night falls. Camping staff leads our class to the small cabin where we were to spend the week. It's a cozy little cabin with 4 bunk beds and a bathroom, nothing spectacular. Unpacked my shit and got settled in. Luckily, got the top bunk. Fell asleep immediately due to exhaustion. Suddenly wake up in the middle of the night feeling uneasy. Slowly open eyes to see a white ghostly hand reaching for me from the bottom bunk. Tell my classmates to stop, thinking they were pranking me. No one responds. Reach out towards the hand. Hand dissipates into thin air. Yell at the top of my lungs to wake up my classmates thinking that there was something in our cabin. Classmates wake up and flicks the light switch on. Everyone starts to ask me WTF is going on. Explain to them what I saw. No one else saw it. Whatever it was never showed up again for the rest of the week. Second event I remember vividly happened at home and not in a woods. Chilling in bed with my dog getting ready to sleep. Pass out only to be woken up to the sound of my dog growling at something. Tell him to quit it thinking he's just being weird. See him staring and growling at this corner in my room. Rub my sleepy eyes to look at the corner. Suddenly see this shadowy smoky figure rising out of the ground. Dog is now full on barking at it. Figure was swaying side to side like a snake would do when being charmed. I could feel like I was being stared at by this thing. Figure then disappears. If my dog hadn't been there growling and barking at this thing, I would have chalked it up to seeing things in my half-asleep state. I don't know why it feels like these things specifically sought me out.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.